None of those have been revived as yet. That said, human embryos have been vitrified, not just frozen, but vitrified and rewarmed and developed, that is to say, into workable, viable fetuses. Now that is as recently as 2004. This may seem like nothing very exciting. It's practically IVF slightly up a notch. However, it's very relevant because for a long time people thought that the low temperatures used would destroy the DNA and render it unretrievable, which does not bode well for one's reanimation. It's obvious that the DNA was not destroyed because otherwise those fetuses would not be able to continue growing and developing.
So how many cells were in these embryos? Were they just 8 or so cells?
It's something along those lines. I don't recall exactly which stage, but it'll be along the 4, 8, 16 stage. It was not a full fetus. Hence the term of embryos rather than fetuses, just to not feel that I'm being in any way misleading or overstating things.
Is it just embryos are easier because they're smaller, so the surface area is big, you can cool them down properly, quickly, effectively, warm up quickly?
Partly, yeah.
How big were these embryos? Were they about the size of a rabbit's kidney or smaller?
Oh no,
Yeah,
embryos are
Smaller.
smaller.
We're talking about 8 cells, 16 cells, those kind of embryos.
Dr. Dusel?
Pinhead size.
16 to 32.
Do you know how many of the actual cells survive the process? Because at that smaller size, the point is if you...
They did
it's
this,
like
in that
splitting.
particular study, they did it with 9 embryos. 4 of those did not survive the process. The others continued growing and developing. I don't know whether they needed to work anything with regards to replacing damaged cells. To the best of my knowledge, those were...
It wasn't that, it's just that the body naturally, if you, for example, if you split that blast, you would think that the result was non-viable and you ended up with twins. The systems separately regrow to the right stage and then continue growing.
Human embryos have been frozen successfully since the mid-1980s. In fact, Whittingham here in the UK was the fellow who developed the technique, and it's now banked all over the world.
No, I'm not going towards that. I was just wondering.
The survival rate's about 80% of freezing of cells in the embryo. The vitrification is a bit higher, around 90% of the cells survive.
This one was the first one with vitrified embryos, to the best of my knowledge. With the rabbit kidney being rewarmed and transplanted to a rabbit with complete viability in 2005, that is more useful than it may immediately appear because, one thing to do a kidney, it's another to do the whole body. Partly for the simple reason of surface area to volume ratio and making sure that everything is vitrified equally, which is quite a mission, as we'll get to a bit more later. But also, modern science is looking towards taking a slight tip from the ancient Egyptians. You may be aware in their mummification process they would take out the organs and place them in canopic jars to be preserved separately. The main reason for this at the time was because the bacteria in those organs, if allowed to spread, would allow the rest of the mummy to decay. However, Alcor do their neuropreservation option, which is essentially where the head is removed, the rest of the body discarded, and the head is vitrified. Now, the reason that this is in some ways viewed as favourable by some people within Alcor is because it is possible to preserve the brain more evenly by itself than if you had the rest of the body to worry about as well, because then if you're trying to get the rest of the body to all vitrify equally, you're not paying as much attention to simply getting that process. And the way a vitrification machine works is relatively simply mechanically, it's a cold version of a Dyson Hoover. Essentially, it's simply about distributing the, I was going to say distributing the cold, you realise that's a physical fallacy, but the coolants, I should say, and removing the heat in the most even manner possible with the cryoprotectants in place to take it down to vitrification levels of around 196 when it's finished, Minus 120 is where the vitrification itself occurs. So that's the point where they really start slowing it down and doing it as slow as 1 degree per minute. 1 degree per hour when they're doing those final stages. On to the next stage. Scientific status. People say, how can you call cryonics scientific? It's, can't be demonstrated. Nobody's been brought back yet. Well, it is proven rationally to work, which often doesn't impress a lot of people. They say, what, you mean it works in theory? It's like communism. But it's actually not quite the same thing. It's not that it works in theory the way that communism may work in theory. It works in theory in the same way that mechanically propelled flight was proven possible many years before it was actually realized. That's simply using existing scientific principles to justify and prove the technology that one is using. It's not the same as creating a new scientific principle out of thin air and saying, well, I can't demonstrate this, but I think this might be the case. It's rationally, in the literal rationalist Cartesian sense, demonstrated to work. It is not proven empirically to work, I say, because we haven't brought any patients back. That said, it is projected that it will be proven empirically in a relatively near future based on the rate of advance in relevant fields. Speaking as I'm to the UK Transhumanist Association, I'd expect you to be more aware of this than most people. The rate of acceleration of progress within technology at the moment, in terms of what we can do with technology, and also with simple things like how small we can make it. Ralph Merkel, the author of Engines of Creation, speaks of nanotechnology in terms of, well, look at current technology, look at the rate at which we're making it smaller. If you follow that curve out, within about 20-30 years, we are going to have the nanotechnology required to reverse the damages that have been caused during cryopreservation, and also what has actually been ailing the person in the first place. Because currently, cryonic suspension is only carried out when somebody is pronounced legally dead. That is done obviously as soon after pronouncement as possible. In the case where standby teams are available, this will be literally, you will have a team of trained people waiting at your bedside for somebody to declare you dead in the hospital. That's in an ideal situation. It is fair to say that around 50% of all cryonics cases have been in undesirable conditions. This ranges from delays in pronouncement, red tape problems, moving a patient from their own country or their own state within America to the storage facility, to problems such as autopsy. In Britain currently, you will be autopsied if you die and your death has not been expected within the most recent 2 weeks. That's my understanding from the paramedics that we have employed within Cryonics UK. We have a medical doctor in the house, don't we? Do we have one? I thought we did earlier. Yes? No? No? Okay.
Most people understand about medicine.
Okay. I was going to ask for a verification on that. That's my current understanding, that you will be autopsied within the UK if you die without a pronouncement from a doctor within the 2 weeks before the cessation of life to say that you're going to die. Autopsy in Britain is an all or nothing thing. It's no good that, I have a bullet entrance wound here and exit wound here. They're still going to slice my brain up because they do the whole process. That's why one of the major issues that cryonics faces at the moment is that of avoiding autopsies. CI's had a patient, I think about 10 patients back, it was the 80-something patient, that arrived to the facility in Michigan with the brain in the abdominal cavity. that's not an ideal situation. So that's why, that's why